Okay, we're live. Hey everyone, welcome to an impromptu episode of the Binary Business Show. I'm your host, Logan Edmonds, CEO of TTS. Joining me is Riley Flaherty. Riley, why don't you go ahead, or Flaherty, right? I always mispronounce your last name. My bad, man. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hey, I'm Riley. I'm the CEO of Hexus Consulting, operating pretty much in the same space as Logan, but out of Wisconsin.
Go Packers.
Covering nationwide except for Ohio, obviously.
Go Packers. I like wearing cheese on my head. All right. Big headline, dude. Big headline. And I'll be honest, I think I've saw this coming for a long time now, but it's now official. The FTC has ruled that non-compete agreements are banned / unenforceable. They are effective 120 days from today, I believe, is what I was reading. Is that your take too?
Yeah, that's what I read.
Holy guacamole.
Yeah, I don't think it's a huge surprise for anyone. I think they hinted at it 6 months ago, and I think we've seen them get harder and harder to enforce over the past even 20 or 30 years, honestly.
I mean, I've seen a lot of businesses. I don't think I've actually ever seen it super enforced. Usually when businesses choose to enforce something along the lines of intellectual property, for example, like a non-compete, they go for the NDA route instead. I've seen that enforced, right? Like you disclose something that wasn't ours. I think it was more, I mean, I'm speaking off the cuff here, but I always found them to be a little scare tactic-y in terms of not for you, the employee, even necessarily, the people who might want to hire you if you have a non-compete, right? Like I'm a business owner, you're a business owner. Neither of us wants to see more lawyers than we have to. Let's just be honest here. It was just one more tool to say, hey, I mean, we were talking, Tom, right? Tom Wyatt. I was talking to him on Facebook the other day. He was like, yeah, no, I've asked people if they had non-competes for that exact reason, right? Like they're great people, but Tom implied to me he's passed on some stuff because he didn't want that action. Right. And I think that's true across multiple industries. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think it is kind of a way to poison the well or poison the resource, really, so that other corporations are less likely to hire them. I also think it's kind of used as a proxy a lot of times for NDAs, non-solicitation, because it's easier to prove. So it's really easy to prove, hey, you went across the street, now you're working for a competitor. Yeah. Harder to prove non-solicitation or, leaks of intellectual property.
I mean, a lot of people know, and this is the reason behind non-competes, right? Like your employees are your greatest strength, but they're also your greatest weakness. Team members are always a double-edged sword. I was just hearing about a story today about a technician that worked for a company here locally, and obviously for confidentiality reasons, I'm not going to go into what, but basically said technician, gave up some confidential information from a client. Basically, some people were talking behind the scenes about said client, and he had an axe to grind and gave up said information to the client directly, right? Like he burned the bridge, and so like that's a great example. There's multiple of these though, like but they just keep going and going, right? Like there's all kinds of stories you hear about employees. Yeah, I can't grow my company without them, but if I'm not careful, they can absolutely cook my goose.
Definitely. Yeah.
Like, what's the saying? It's not one bad apple, right? It's one bad apple spoils the bunch, right? Like you can have an amazing team, and all it takes is one person acting as a bad actor to totally throw the whole ship out of whack.
Yeah, it definitely does. Although I almost wonder if at this point, what I think that the non-competes did. So to take like the textbook example of why you would use one, like say you're starting a company that a software company or something with really niche high tech intellectual property.
Oh, yeah, secret sauce.
And we don't want them
companies, right?
Exactly.
Clinical data, right? 100%.
So you've got maybe a core team of 10 really high skilled people, and you want to prevent them from just walking directly across the street to your competitor and nerfing your startup, basically. And probably taking customers and intellectual property with you. And I think what non-competes did in a way is they created a false sense of security around that, because the idea was, okay, now we know he can't walk across the street, so we feel we can trust this employee. When in reality, anyone who's a small business owner knows, anyone who's hired anyone knows, there are a ton of people out there willing to fork up, whatever information about their previous employer.
Oh, it's not even on the big business either. I used to work for a business, and I'm not under NDA or non-compete for this, so I can talk about this without mentioning names. I used to work for a business of 3 people, which I was one of them. And basically, it was the owner, a guy that worked for him for like 17 plus years, and then me, the new guy. What happened was the owner and the guy that worked for each other for 17 years had a falling out. And you know what that guy did? He didn't have a non-compete, didn't have an NDA. He ran off and took a third of the business with them, right? Like all the client relationships, everything he did. And it's funny because people would say, "Oh, he should have signed a non-compete." I would argue that non-competes are almost unenforceable in court, depending on how they're written, especially some of the more ridiculous ones. I've seen. Again, asterisk. Neither of us are lawyers, so yeah.
Very true.
This is dummy legal takes right here of non-qualified individuals. You have been warned. But I have seen some non-competes with ridiculous terms, like you can't work in a 500-mile radius in my industry if you work for me, right? No court is ever going to side with you in those kind of non-competes ever. They're going to look at you as barring someone from entering the free market.
Right.
Even the most like business-friendly courts in the nation, they're not going to take your side in that.
No.
And that's one of the reasons why, in my opinion, non-competes have been used as a security blanket that doesn't really exist for the longest time.
Yeah.
Executives are thinking, hey, at least I've got this, so I'm protected. Even though every legal voice I've ever talked to has any kind of qualification says your mileage may vary, but generally they're not enforceable.
Right. Yeah. I think the hope is that they prevent the employee from trying to work from a competitor and they prevent the competitor from trying to hire the employee. But at the end of the day, I think what they're really getting at, I mean, the ultimate concern in most cases that they put non-compete agreements in is really more of an NDA concern than it is a non-compete concern.
That was literally. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
It's just kind of a way of it's another way of attacking it, another layer you can put on it that kind of makes a more obvious enforcement mechanism. But at the end of the day, those employees that, regardless of what piece of paper they signed, they might be taking your data out the door anyways and giving it to your competitor.
We're talking about insider threats here. That's basically what this conversation is leading to, right? Like insider threats is a huge cybersecurity concern, right? Like employers have to properly manage their employees. There has to be a level of trust and delegation, especially as you scale a business where it's not going to grow. But on the other hand, as we just alluded to in multiple stories, all it takes is one bad actor to really make you have a nightmare scenario pop up. So I agree with you, by the way, when it comes to non-NDAs, right? NDAs are probably the better way to go on that. As you mentioned before, NDAs are super hard to prove sometimes because you have to prove a negative, right? Like, did so-and-so violate something? That's been typically the big problem with enforcing NDAs is you have to have a lot of ammo in order to actually win that out in court. So what are employers supposed to do that's more realistic than trying to enforce an NDA, right? Like, because they can't enforce the non-compete. They weren't able, employers weren't able to enforce non-compete, if I'm being honest, before anyway. NDAs, I'll be honest, if you're trying to fight an NDA in court, you probably already lost the battle for most small businesses. The damage is done. So what are they supposed to do, right? Like in terms of protecting themselves against a rogue actor inside their own organization?
Yeah. Well, I think it's kind of come back to it'll force a little bit more honest and direct of a conversation in the business leadership about what they're actually trying to prevent and what they're actually trying to do. Because now we're back to pretty much using real physical methods of enforcement that actually target the problem directly. And back in the day, you don't know if a guy scribed down your customer book, before the age of the internet and computers. There's obviously no way to verify that. He could have written it on another piece of paper. But in the digital age, there are actually mechanisms that can be used to at least provide you significantly more insight to where data is going.
Yeah, I mean, the technical capabilities an organization has at their disposal to make it at least more inconvenient for an employee to walk out with the crown jewels. It has never been easier to get involved in your business. Even if you're this 5-person, 3-person business, there are tools now available to you at a reasonable cost to help mitigate the risk of someone just taking your customer lists, your intellectual property. If you're some kind of inventor, your patents. For me, I do a lot of biotech and pharmaceuticals, so the clinical formulas, the results, all that stuff. Like setting up proper policy around what the employee can and can't do in your technology environment doing things like, hey, they can't write stuff to a USB stick, right? Like
Right.
what world? There's very few jobs nowadays, in my humble opinion, that require you to be able to use USB sticks on your computer. Like very few. So let's just turn that off. So they can't just copy all the stuff from SharePoint onto a USB stick, right? Like that's a great idea. Another thing too, if it's something super sensitive, right? Like client lists, make it read only. Make it only so the people who only need to, like only the absolute necessary people who need to edit stuff can edit. Everyone else is read only. You're going to make them work for it. I mean, where they get, like, I mean, there's some stuff that you can never predict. You can never prevent or predict, like someone just taking pictures of a screen with their phone, right? Like, I get that. I do get that. But there is some reasonable safeguards. And the other thing too is, and this is my humble opinion, insider threats don't necessarily have to be intentional.
Right.
Accidental insider threat is totally a thing. Like somebody doesn't realize something is confidential, or somebody doesn't realize they took some data to take it, and then it falls into the wrong hands, right? What's your take on that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and even to take the example, really what this is doing is forcing yet another angle of security practices that should be already implemented, or at least should be on the radar of most businesses. Least privileged access in general, just the concept of, limiting access to the people that need it, is underutilized, I think, in most businesses out there. Most businesses are giving people access they don't need, whether it's out of convenience or just out of, lack of consideration in the first place. I think that's pretty common. And on top of that, even if an individual does need access to things that would make it easy for them to abscond with that data, there are tools in place to at least let you know, hey, Bob just downloaded your entire SharePoint directory on your computer.
I get those notifications all the time. Like someone downloaded like 16 gigs from SharePoint, and I'm like, that's the whole thing. Who did that? Why? Right? Like it's very easy to ask a question as an executive. Like, okay, there's not really a reasonable explanation why you need to take a whole copy of everything, right? There's certain dumb things you can do.
No, I'm not a lawyer, but I think that gives you a pretty solid. I think if Bob leaves after dumping the entire SharePoint directory onto a flash drive, and then pops up at the competitor across the street after signing NDAs and non-solicitation agreements, I think that gives you a much more solid case than just trying to enforce a boilerplate non-compete agreement.
100%. So let's give some people some practical stuff. What we're talking about. One of the big things I think that is super practical for any organization, you can start with right now. When it comes to, there's this term that's thrown around a lot in our industry, zero trust. You know where I'm going with this, right? Everybody should have the access they need to do their job in your company and no more. Right. And yes, it does require a bit of work on your part as the executive or owner of the business, because you got to plan that. Like you got to actually look at what do they need to do their job and what they need access to. But here's the reason why. If everyone has access to everything, how hard is it to kind of accomplish what we're talking about?
Not hard at all.
Yeah, like if your assistant, who's part-time janitor, has access to all the intellectual property of your $1 million firm, like why does she have access? What world does she need access? And again, like we talked about, if you trust your assistant implicitly in this scenario, it's not always intentional. Accidental inside threat is a thing. People sometimes copy stuff to their computers they're not aware of. They email things they shouldn't email to people with someone, CC'd in the subject line. Oh, hey, I just sent some intellectual property and so-and-so was CC'd in there from a different company. Like there's all kinds of scenarios that come up where this could absolutely come into play. So I guess what it comes down to is there's no quick fix for this. No. You need to actually put some effort and some proper planning into how you manage your employees, how they manage their access to your firm, what you're doing, and also do some proper planning, right? I think this is the other thing. A lot of businesses don't plan to give their employees access to all the crown jewels, but they start small and then they have to scale, right? And you and I both know scaling has its own unique challenges. And as they scale, sometimes they trade speed for efficiency, right? Like instead of efficiency, they were getting more speed, scale quickly. And then they're left with a bunch of problems in the back end. Like, oh gosh, yeah, this is kind of janky how we have set up, but going backwards and fixing it, that can be a real task.
It definitely can. And I guess the other thing to keep in mind for business owners that are thinking about it and saying, all right, I'm a small company, or we have a very insular team of trusted people that have been with us for 10 years. I can't foresee a world in which this is happening. All my staff are technically savvy enough not to accidentally leak data. Even if all those things are true, which honestly they're probably not 100% true, but even if they all are true, that doesn't even take into account the fact that malicious actors can gain control of those people's accounts, and then it has nothing to do with the trust of that person
What
as
happens
well.
if Sally is got her Google Drive set up on her work computer along with all your stuff, right? And without even realizing that she's syncing her desktop documents and pictures to her personal Google Drive, right?
Yep.
Like now you have a whole other thing that's outside of your system that you can't take away from her because it's her personal stuff. That I have a story, which is I have a family member this happened to where someone hacked their email. Set of person's retired. They have a fixed income. They hacked their email. They read their email. They figured out who they banked with. They then reset their bank's password using that email, changed the email on the bank's accounts to a different email, and then tried to wire themselves money, right? Like criminals do go after even little old ladies' email accounts all the time. So now you have this threat of, great, that stinks enough for people. And we could talk all day about that one. Once a said person has my data from my organization, stuff that I care about, my intellectual property on their stuff. Like
Right.
there's just so many questions to ask here.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think exfil is the thing people don't put enough attention to because they're stuck in kind of the old ransomware mindset. Like, oh, we've got backups. If people encrypt our data, we'll just recover it. They're a lot smarter than that now. They know what information you don't want out there, and they'll use that as a lever just as much as they use ransomware.
And part of this is business design. Last thing for non-competes, design your business in a way where it's not easy for your employees to just walk out with your crown jewels. Like I don't want to toot my own horn because I know I have room to improve my own business 100%,
Yep.
but I'm reasonably confident. I love my team. I trust them.
Yep.
Any one of them could walk out and they're not taking my customers or my intellectual property with them.
Right.
Set up those things in advance.
Exactly. And the way I would phrase it is basically insurance is great, but you should still lock your front door.
100%. All right. Well, we agreed we were only going to do this for 15 minutes and we're at 17 already because we both have stuff to do. But this seemed like a big topic. I'm sure we're going to have tons of conversations about this in days to come. One more time for those who joined late. My name is Logan Edmonds. I'm CEO of TTS, host of the Binary Business Show.
I am Riley Flaherty, CEO of Hexus Consulting, and I'm just here.
If you want good cheese, go visit Riley in Wisconsin.
And beer.
Ooh.
And sausage.
We have bourbon. I'm in Ohio. We're right above Louisville. We got bourbon.
We'll trade.
This is why free commerce. Yay.
Exactly.
All right, guys. Take care. Have a great rest of your day and keep up to date. This subject. I have a feeling it's going to keep evolving. We're going to see more stories about this. Bye.